This one is for UFC London's co-main event. Jack Hermansson facing his new opponent, Chris Curtis. I'm excited for this one for quite a few reasons. I'm a big fan of Jack Hermansson. I have been for a long while, throughout his Cage Warriors career and joining the UFC, and I feel like he's gotten better. Of course, he's stumbled a bit as he's gotten near the top, but that's the sorting process of the top 5, top 10 of the division. Sometimes you run into people that are a little bit better than you, and sometimes you meet opponents that you're a little bit better than, and that's been the case for Hermansson. Curtis, on the other side, has had quite a career outside of the UFC. He's had a lot of experience, a lot of lessons outside of the UFC. A bit of disappointment not getting to the UFC, on his terms. He was a bit of an afterthought. But now he's arrived, and the way that he performed, especially in his debut, I think he has a lot to offer the division. Okay, quick tale of the tape. So, 22-7 for Jack Hermansson compared to 29-8 for Curtis. So both of these guys, very seasoned in their careers, lots of experience, and very much know who they are as competitors, are very good at expressing themselves and sticking to their game plan, knowing what's best for them. Jack Hermansson with a slight height and reach advantage, which will be useful if he can maintain it, but also, with his neck attacks as well, it's also useful to have a couple of extra inches in reach so you can get those fingertips together on those arming guillotines, which I'll come back to. 16 TKOs out of 29 finishes for Chris Curtis. One armbar finish, so he's obviously far more of a striker than a grappler. Great takedown defense though, 100% takedown defense in the UFC, which is, it's also worth noting that against Adolfo Vieira he defended 20 takedowns, so it's not like 100% of 3 attempts he's defended. He's defended a lot of takedowns so far, and he's always been very, very solid. Jack Hermansson's not got the most orthodox of takedown game. He doesn't have great success, 30% success rate, but he is persistent, and he doesn't really need to land in any particular position to start working. He's also got some of the best ground and pound in the sport, Jack Hermansson has. You can see that on full display against Gerald Meerschaert. He really, really does a number on him before submitting him. Really good ground and pound, very, very powerful, very good at controlling people with his lower body so he can strike with both hands. But I do think it will be difficult to get Chris Curtis to the floor, as we've seen. 100% takedown defense. He's very strong, he's very patient, he stands his ground, and he's very good at fighting out of a good defense. That's what we saw in his UFC debut, and I think it served him really well against Phil Hawes, who was a good wrestler, a good striker, all round just a dangerous individual to be standing in front of. And, coming in and making his actual UFC debut, he was very calm and very collected. And I think that's because he started out with the first couple of minutes of, just standing there behind a good defense and not really throwing too much back. I think that will serve him well against Jack Hermansson, because Hermansson is a bit more chaotic, a bit more erratic, not only in the way that he moves, like his rhythm is a bit kind of chaotic. He kind of bounds and twitches, and then all of a sudden he's leaping in, to strike you with odd things. He puts full power into his kicks, but also his attack is quite chaotic. As soon as he gets his hands on you, there's a lot of like momentum to his attacks, a lot of foot sweeps and spinning and transitioning from one attack to the next until something works. I think if Chris Curtis is able to, spend those first couple of 3 minutes just kind of shutting Jack Hermansson down, taking away some of that chaotic energy and, kind of throwing a fire blanket over it, if you like, it will allow him to settle into a game where he can then start to pressure Jack Hermansson. But if Hermansson's able to start fast and able to get inside the gates of Chris Curtis's defense, then it starts to become a bit more interesting, especially in that first round. Out of, 37 fights for Chris Curtis, he's had 5 first-round finishes. Out of the 29 fights for Jack Hermansson, he's had 10 first-round finishes. So he's got 16 finishes, 10 in the first round. So he's a prolific finisher and he's a fast worker. If he can start that initiation of a chaotic scramble where Chris Curtis is now starting to have to defend and turn and twist and, Brendan Allen was on his back in the first minute or so, if I remember correctly. There are going to be moments where Jack Hermansson might be able to, come at him like a spider monkey and just take him by surprise, especially when they're dry, when there's not a lot of sweat on their body. Hermansson is great at closing distance, chaotically grabbing a hold of somebody and relentlessly trying to get them to the floor, where then he can establish a top position and start his ground and pound. And then eventually they'll either expose their back and get TKO'd, or he'll find that guillotine at some point. 6 submissions on Hermansson's record out of 22 wins, 2 guillotines, 2 rear naked chokes, an armbar, and a heel hook. So attacks from different positions. And again, he's a fast worker. Chris Curtis has got really good takedown offense, 100% takedown offense. At Vieira, if he could have got him on the floor, of course, Vieira's ground game is exceptional. But he couldn't get him there. 20 attempts. Failed every time. He's also got a high striking output, Chris Curtis. So Jack Hermansson's at 4.97 compared to Chris Curtis, who's at 7.23. He has got a high striking output, and it is a patient one as well. That's why I think this is a good fight for. I mean, it's a good fight for both of them in different ways, depending on how they perform. But Chris Curtis has got the style that could be very problematic for Jack Hermansson for a lot of reasons. Because Hermansson's a momentum kind of fighter, sometimes momentum is based on confidence. And if the momentum is not going your direction, if Jack Hermansson tries 2 times in the first 3 minutes of the fight to get a hold of him, get him to the floor, land something significant, and he's not able to, and Curtis is just walking him down and not opening up like he did against Phil Hawes, then I could see Jack Hermansson starting to become a little bit unnerved, feeling a bit bullied like he was in the Jared Cannonier fight. And that's where Chris Curtis's confidence, his southpaw, low lead hand boxing style will come into play, because we've seen that he doesn't need much wind up to land power punches. Against Brendan Allen, it was right hook to the body, left hook to the body, right hook to the head. Against Phil Hawes, which I'm going to show you in a second, it was just that nice timed left hand, as Phil Hawes stepped into position. I think the longer this fight stays on the feet, the more it starts to lean quite clearly towards Chris Curtis. There are problematic things about Jack Hermansson's striking, but what I see fairly consistently is that if he comes under striking pressure, he will try and clinch. The only reason he'll stop doing that is if he becomes discouraged that it's not going to get him anywhere, and then he will stop wasting the energy trying. But the patience of Chris Curtis is something that could be a bit, a bit unnerving for Jack Hermansson if the first round's not going his way, because he has quite a chaotic style. He does leave himself open sometimes, and he doesn't necessarily have the grappling to be able to ground some of these North America-based fighters that have got wrestling in their high schools. If he's dry and he's able to get his hands on Chris Curtis and he catches him cold, because as we know Curtis doesn't particularly start fast, then there's definitely an opportunity there for Hermansson to climb up him and wrap his arms around his neck. But the more I watch Chris Curtis, the more I'm impressed with him. I do feel like he's probably more suited to welterweight, but just like Kelvin Gastelum, which would be a good fight for Chris Curtis. Just like Kelvin Gastelum, though, he's more comfortable at middleweight, and Curtis, he's fought everywhere from welterweight to light heavyweight, and he just looks like he doesn't really cut weight. He's not out of shape by any means, but he's not forcing himself down to a weight class, and really, really struggling. I think we're seeing quite a few fighters. Strickland is another one. Benefits from not really cutting too much weight and walking onto the scales and then being fresh for the fight. You see it with Chris Curtis, and maybe that's a decision he's made based on his experience, but I'm certainly keeping my eye on him, and I think he's got a really good opportunity here with Darren Till falling out to be positioned in a co-main event against Jack Hermansson. If he picks up a win here, we know that there's a bright future for him, but I also can't count out Jack Hermansson because he's one of my favourites to watch. Okay, enjoy these fights.